Find someone else to play your games.
I'm Jake Miller, 34. Been married to Emma Harrison Miller for 5 years. Her family is old money Philadelphia. Think trust funds, country clubs, generations of inherited wealth. I'm a CPA from Camden. Parents were a construction foreman and a school nurse. Should have seen the red flags from day one, but love makes you blind to a lot of crap. Emma's family is like watching a train wreck in slow motion. Horrifying, but you can't look away. First up is Margaret Harrison, Emma's mother, who used to teach middle school art before deciding that wasn't pretentious enough. Now she owns the Harrison Gallery in Rittenhouse Square, where she sells overpriced paintings to other rich people who think dropping $5,000 on what looks like a toddler's finger painting makes them cultured. Margaret has this way of looking at me like I'm a stain on her Persian rug. Not quite disgusted enough to acknowledge it directly, but definitely planning to have me professionally cleaned out of existence. Then there's Sophia, Emma's younger sister, 28, who's never worked a day in her life unless you count influencing people to buy expensive skincare products she gets for free. She's engaged to Connor Wellington. Yes, those Wellingtons with the real estate empire older than the city itself. Connor's the type of guy who wears boat shoes year-round and calls everyone chief, but he's actually decent, which makes him an anomaly in this social circle. Me? I'm just Jake Miller, financial consultant from Camden, son of blue-collar parents who worked their A's off to put me through college. I work hard, pay my bills, and somehow thought being a decent human being would earn some basic respect from my wife's family. Yeah, I know. What was I thinking? When Emma and I first met at some nonprofit fundraiser that probably existed solely to make rich people feel better about themselves, she seemed different. She ordered this ridiculously complicated coffee. Oat milk cortado with Madagascar vanilla and a dash of Ceylon cinnamon. No foam. When the barista looked confused, I stepped in and helped translate. She laughed, and for a moment she seemed real, human, not like the porcelain doll she'd become around her family. Those early days were good. We'd grab cheesesteaks at hole-in-the-wall places in South Philly, walk along the Delaware River, and she'd actually listen when I talked about maybe starting my own consulting firm someday. She'd roll her eyes when I made jokes about her fancy friends, but it was playful, not cruel. I thought I'd found someone who could see past all the social BS that seems to consume everyone in this city. Then I met her family, and everything changed faster than Pennsylvania weather. Suddenly, my stable, respectable job wasn't impressive. It was adequate, I suppose. My apartment in Fishtown wasn't cozy. It was quaint, which is rich people speak for embarrassingly small. My friends weren't down to earth. They were colorful characters, like I was running a traveling circus instead of having normal human relationships. The worst part was watching Emma change. At first, it was subtle suggestions about wearing different clothes to family dinners, nothing major, just something a little more polished. Then it was my hair. Apparently, my regular barber wasn't sophisticated enough, so she booked me at some salon where they charged more for a haircut than I used to spend on groceries in a month. Before long, I was getting critiqued on everything from my handshake to the way I pronounced certain words. But I kept telling myself it was temporary growing pains, that once we got married, once I proved I was committed to being part of their world, things would get better. I was like a guy standing in a house that's clearly on fire, insisting the smoke alarm must be malfunctioning because surely everything's fine, right? The wedding was our first real taste of what married life would be like, and it was about as fun as a root canal performed by a blindfolded dentist. Margaret took over every single decision. Flowers, menu, guest list, everything. When I suggested inviting my college buddies, she got this look like I'd proposed holding the ceremony at Hooters. Perhaps we should keep it intimate, she said, which translated to, your friends aren't welcome in our sacred temple of pretension. Emma just sat there through all of it, nodding along like a bobblehead doll. When I tried to talk to her about it later, she'd get defensive. My mother just wants everything to be perfect, she'd say. This is important to her. What about what was important to me? What about what was important to us as a couple? Apparently, those weren't questions we were allowed to ask. After the wedding, we moved into a nice house in Society Hill. Well, I should say I moved us into a nice house since my name was the only one on the mortgage. Emma didn't work anymore. She'd quit her nonprofit job to focus on being a wife, which apparently meant planning elaborate dinner parties for her mother's friends and spending her days at yoga classes and boutique shopping. I kept working, bringing in steady income, handling all the finances, maintaining the house, and trying to be the husband I thought she wanted. But nothing I did was ever quite right. If I worked late, I wasn't prioritizing our marriage. If I came home early, I was being clingy. If I suggested a quiet evening at home, I was being boring. If I planned something fun, it wasn't the right kind of fun for people like us. The weekly family dinners became torture sessions disguised as quality time. Every Sunday, we'd sit around Margaret's dining room table while she held court, discussing art exhibitions I'd never heard of, name-dropping people I'd never meet, and making subtle digs about everything from my career prospects to my table manners. Sophia would chime in with her own little barbs, usually about how Connor was doing such important work in real estate development while I just handled regular people's money. Emma would occasionally throw me a bone, mentioning some small success at work or defending me when the attacks got too obvious. But she never stood up to them, never told them to back off, never made it clear that disrespecting her husband was unacceptable. Instead, she'd pull me aside later and ask me to try to fit in better or make more of an effort with Mother. That's when I started to realize the truth I'd been avoiding. I wasn't Emma's partner. I was her project, her fixer-upper husband who just needed the right renovations to become acceptable to her family. And no matter how many improvements I made, there would always be something else wrong with me, something else that needed changing. Fast forward to last weekend. Sophia's engagement party at the Philadelphia Museum of Art. They'd rented out the entire Renaissance wing because nothing says we're better than everyone else, like making a museum your private party venue. The place was transformed into something that looked like it belonged in a fairy tale, if fairy tales were written exclusively for people with trust funds. I'd spent more time getting ready for this party than I had for my own wedding, standing in front of my closet like I was selecting armor for battle. My navy suit hung there like a symbol of everything I was trying to be, but would never actually become in their eyes. Emma was in the bathroom for over an hour. The bigger the audience of rich people, the longer the preparation time. Walking into that museum felt like stepping onto the set of some reality show where the only rule was see how long the middle-class guy can survive before he completely loses his crap. The lobby was buzzing with the kind of energy you only get when you put a bunch of wealthy people in one place and tell them they're celebrating something important. The reception area had been transformed with flowers everywhere, not just any flowers, but elaborate arrangements that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. White roses, orchids, and some exotic crap I couldn't identify that screamed, "We have more money than we know what to do with." Classical music played just loud enough to provide ambiance without interfering with the sound of people congratulating themselves on being wealthy. The hostess was exactly what you'd expect. Young, gorgeous, professionally trained to make wealthy people feel important. Her dress probably cost more than I made in a week. "Good evening," she said as we approached. "Welcome to the Wellington Harrison engagement celebration." Emma stepped forward with lifetime confidence. "Emma Miller," she said, and I noticed she didn't bother introducing me. The hostess checked her tablet efficiently. "Of course, Mrs. Miller, we're so delighted to have you here. Your table is in the VIP section, naturally." VIP section, because apparently even engagement parties needed different levels of importance. The hostess handed Emma an elegant card, then her eyes shifted to me with that brief moment of uncertainty, like she was trying to figure out exactly where I fit. "And you are?" she asked, her smile still professional, but perhaps a fraction less warm. "Jake Miller," I said, extending my hand like a normal human being. "Emma's husband." She glanced down at her tablet, then back up at me, then down again. Her smile flickered like a light bulb that wasn't sure if it wanted to stay on. "I'm sorry, Mr. Miller," she said, and I could hear something in her voice that I didn't like. "I don't see your name on our VIP section list." The words hit me like a punch to the gut. "There might be some mistake," I said, though I had a sinking feeling there wasn't a mistake at all. Emma turned to look at me, and I saw something in her eyes that made my blood run cold. It wasn't surprise or confusion. It was something that looked almost like satisfaction. "Oh," she said, her voice sweet as honey but sharp as a knife. "Didn't I tell you?" "Tell me what?" I asked, though I was pretty sure I didn't want to know. "This part of the evening is for family only," she said, like she was explaining something obvious to a child. "You know, the VIP reception, the intimate part before the main party starts? Family only." Family only. I was her husband. I was family, or at least I thought I was. "What exactly does that mean?" I asked, feeling the answer settling in my stomach like a stone. Emma's smile got wider and she leaned closer, close enough that I could smell her expensive perfume. "It means this part is for real family," she said, her voice so quiet only I could hear it. "You can join the general guests for the main reception." Real family. The hostess was still standing there, trying to look professionally neutral while clearly enjoying the drama. Other guests were starting to notice our conversation, and I could feel their eyes on us like spotlights. I was becoming the entertainment. "Are you serious right now?" I asked, though I could tell from Emma's expression that she was dead serious. "It's nothing personal, Jake," she said, though everything about her tone suggested it was extremely personal. "It's just how these things work. The family has their private time, and then everyone joins together for the main celebration. Nothing personal. Because publicly excluding your husband from the family portion of your sister's engagement party was just standard operating procedure." The hostess gestured toward what looked like a smaller, less elegant section of the museum. "Mr. Miller, you're welcome to join our general reception area. There's lovely cocktail service, and you'll be able to join the main celebration once it begins." The general reception area, like I was some kind of second-class citizen who needed to be quarantined until the important people were ready to mingle with the commoners. Emma was still smiling at me, and there was something in her expression I'd never seen before. Like she was enjoying this, like she'd been planning this moment and was savoring every second of my humiliation. "I'll see you later, honey," she said, reaching up to pat my cheek in a gesture that looked affectionate but felt condescending as hell. "Try to have fun." People were definitely staring now. I could feel their eyes on me, hear the whispered conversations. Who is that man? Why isn't he with his wife? How embarrassing. I followed the hostess to the general reception area, where I spent the cocktail hour with some retired professor and his wife, a young tech couple who were clearly as out of place as I was, and an older gentleman who seemed to spend most of his time staring at the VIP section like he was trying to figure out how to get upgraded. From where I was sitting, I had a perfect view of the family table. I could see Emma holding court with her mother and sister, all three looking like they'd stepped out of a magazine about women who lunch. Margaret was in her element, gesturing dramatically as she told what was probably some story about her latest gallery acquisition. Sophia was practically glowing, her massive engagement ring catching the light, and Connor looked like the perfect preppy Prince Charming. Emma looked absolutely radiant, more relaxed and joyful than she had in our own living room in years. The irony wasn't lost on me that she looked happier sitting 30 feet away from me than she had living with me. Then dinner service began with all the pomp you'd expect from an event that probably cost more than most people's annual salary. An army of servers appeared, moving with synchronized precision, carrying silver trays through the room like they were performing an elaborate dance. At the family table, servers placed elegant appetizers at every seat, little works of art on expensive china, fancy seafood arrangements with microgreens and sauce drizzled in patterns that probably had names I couldn't pronounce. Everyone was getting served simultaneously, like a well-oiled machine designed to deliver overpriced food to overpriced people. But when the servers reached my table, something strange happened. They placed appetizers in front of everyone except me. The professor got his fancy seafood thing, the tech couple got theirs, even the business partner guy got his little plate of pretentious food art. But when the server reached my seat, he just kept walking. At first I thought it was a mistake, but after watching everyone else start eating while my place setting remained conspicuously empty, I flagged down a passing server, a young guy who looked like he was working his way through college. "Excuse me," I said, keeping my voice polite. "I think there might have been a mistake. I didn't receive an appetizer." The server looked genuinely confused, checking his mental notes. Then something shifted in his expression. Recognition, maybe understanding, not the good kind. "I'm sorry, sir," he said, and he really did look sorry. "My instructions were specifically not to serve you this evening, not to serve me. Not we ran out or there was a mix-up. My instructions were not to serve you like I was some unwelcome pest who needed to be managed rather than fed." The professor and his wife had stopped talking and were staring at me with confusion and secondhand embarrassment. The tech couple exchanged glances that clearly said, "What the hell is going on here?" "I'm sorry," I said to the server, my voice getting tighter, "but there must be some mistake. I'm Jake Miller. I'm married to Emma Miller, the bride's sister." The server's face went through a series of expressions: confusion, recognition, pity, and finally resignation. "Sir, I was told very specifically by the event coordinator that you were not to be served dinner this evening. I'm really sorry, but those are my instructions. Those are my instructions. Someone, and I had a pretty good idea who, had specifically told the catering staff not to feed me at a family event where I was supposed to be family. I looked across the room toward the VIP section, and that's when I saw her. Emma was looking directly at me, and the expression on her face made everything clear. She wasn't confused or concerned. She was smiling, not big or obvious, but a small, satisfied curve of her lips that told me everything I needed to know. This wasn't a mistake. This wasn't an oversight. This was planned, deliberate, and personal. She leaned over to Margaret and whispered something, and both women glanced in my direction with expressions that could only be described as amused, like they were watching a particularly entertaining episode of their favorite reality show. Course after course kept arriving for everyone else. Some kind of soup that looked like it had been crafted by someone with a degree in food architecture, followed by what I assumed was the main course. Increasingly complex arrangements of meat and vegetables appearing on everyone's plates except mine. The professor's wife leaned over and whispered, "Would you like some of mine? I always order too much anyway." Her kindness almost broke me. Here was a complete stranger offering to share her food, because my own wife had decided I didn't deserve to eat. "Thank you," I said quietly, "but I think I'm good." I wasn't good. I was the opposite of good. Then the same server came by again, looking even more uncomfortable. "Sir," he said quietly, "I've been asked to inform you that if you'd like to join the family table, you're welcome to do so. But the seating there is also reserved for family dinner service only." Family dinner service only. They'd found a way to make the humiliation worse. I could sit with them, but I still wouldn't be allowed to eat. I'd just be the guy sitting at the fancy table watching everyone else enjoy their expensive meal. I looked across the room at Emma, who was delicately cutting what looked like the world's most expensive piece of fish while engaged in animated conversation with Connor's mother. She looked absolutely perfect, poised, elegant, completely in her element. And she was wearing my grandmother's necklace, the one piece of jewelry I'd inherited from my family, the one thing of real sentimental value I'd brought into our marriage. She'd asked to borrow it earlier, saying it would go perfectly with her dress, and I'd said yes, because that's what you do when you love someone. You share the things that matter to you. But looking at it now, seeing it sparkle against her throat while she systematically destroyed what was left of our relationship, it felt less like sharing and more like theft. I reached into my jacket pocket and felt the small velvet box I'd been carrying around for the past hour. Earlier, Emma had asked me to hold her ring, some family heirloom from Margaret's side that she'd worn to complement her outfit, but taken off before dinner because it was too bulky for proper dining. I'd slipped it into my pocket without thinking, the way you do when your wife asks you to hold something. But now, sitting there like a ghost at my own family celebration, that ring felt like evidence of all the times I'd been helpful, accommodating, supportive, and considerate while she'd been planning new ways to make me feel like I didn't belong. You know what's funny about breaking points? They don't usually come with dramatic music or slow motion effects like in movies. They're usually quiet, almost anticlimactic moments when something inside you just stops trying, stops hoping, stops giving a damn about consequences. For me, that moment came sitting at table 12, watching my wife smile like she'd just won the lottery while I sat there like a pariah who wasn't worth feeding. I pulled the box out of my pocket and opened it. The ring was beautiful. Some kind of vintage piece with diamonds arranged in an intricate pattern that probably had a fancy name and a price tag to match. It caught the light from the chandeliers and sparkled like a tiny constellation, the kind of jewelry meant to be admired and envied and passed down through generations of people who mattered. The irony wasn't lost on me that I was holding something worth more than I made in several months, while being told I wasn't worthy of a $20 appetizer. I stood up slowly, the chair scraping against the marble floor with a sound that seemed louder than it should have been. Conversations at my table stopped mid-sentence, and I could feel eyes turning toward me from neighboring tables. The professor's wife looked concerned, like she was worried I might do something drastic. But I wasn't planning to make a scene. I wasn't going to shout or cause a disturbance or give them the satisfaction of seeing me lose my crap in public. I was just done, completely, utterly, exhaustingly done with all of it. I walked across the ballroom with steady, measured steps, my Italian leather shoes clicking against the marble floor in a rhythm that felt almost ceremonial. People were starting to notice. Conversations were quieting, heads were turning, and I could feel the weight of dozens of stares following my progress toward the VIP section. Emma saw me coming. I could tell because her perfect smile faltered for just a second, replaced by something that looked almost like panic. She said something to Margaret, who looked over at me with barely concealed irritation. I reached their table and stood behind Emma's chair for a moment, looking down at the elaborate dinner spread that I apparently wasn't worthy to share. The plates were works of art. The wine was probably older than I was, and the conversation was no doubt fascinating to people who cared about whatever rich people found fascinating. Emma turned in her chair to look up at me, and for a split second I saw something in her eyes that might have been fear. "Jake," she said, her voice bright and fake, "what are you doing?" What was I doing? 5 years I'd been trying to earn a place at this table, trying to prove I belonged in this world, trying to convince myself that love would be enough to bridge the gap between who I was and who they wanted me to be. But standing there looking down at my wife wearing my grandmother's necklace, while she systematically excluded me from her life, I realized I'd been asking the wrong question all along. It wasn't, how do I earn my place here? It was, why the hell do I want to be here in the first place? I reached into my pocket and pulled out the ring box. The entire table went quiet. Margaret stopped talking mid-sentence. Sophia's laugh died in her throat. And Connor looked like he was trying to figure out if he should call security. I opened the box and carefully removed the ring, holding it up so it caught the light from the chandeliers. It was beautiful, expensive, and meaningful to people who valued things more than relationships. Then I placed it gently on the pristine white tablecloth, right next to Emma's dinner plate. It made a tiny sound when it touched the table, not dramatic or earth-shattering, just a small click that somehow seemed to echo through the sudden silence that had fallen over the VIP section. "I'm done," I said quietly, my voice calm and steady in a way that surprised even me. The words hung in the air like smoke from a tool that had just been fired. Simple, final, and completely irreversible. Emma's face went through a series of expressions: confusion, disbelief, panic, and finally something that looked like genuine terror. "Jake, wait," she started, but I was already turning away, already walking back toward the exit, already leaving behind the last 5 years of my life like clothes that had never quite fit right. Behind me I could hear chaos beginning. Raised voices, scraping chairs, what sounded like Sophia starting to cry. But I didn't look back. I just kept walking, my steps echoing through the ballroom like a countdown to freedom. The silence that followed my little ring-dropping performance was more like platinum, rare, valuable, and absolutely priceless in its ability to make everyone realize they'd just witnessed something spectacular. I'd barely made it 3 steps when all hell broke loose. The first voice I heard was Connor's, and for a guy who usually sounded like he'd learned to speak from watching Downton Abbey, he sounded genuinely pissed off. "What the hell just happened here?" he demanded, his voice rising above what was socially acceptable. Apparently, even elite boarding school training has limits when your fiancé's family starts acting like reality TV characters. "Connor, please let me explain," I heard Emma say, and there was panic in her voice I'd never heard before. "Explain what, exactly?" Connor's voice was getting louder. "Explain why your husband just walked away from your family's table like he was escaping from prison? Explain why he looked like he hadn't eaten anything all evening? Explain why none of you seem particularly surprised by any of this?" That's when Connor's mother, Vivian Wellington, stood up. She was a woman who looked like she'd been carved from marble and dressed by the same people who outfit British royalty. Her voice was crisp and authoritative with the kind of accent that screamed old money. "Are you suggesting that what we just witnessed was some kind of accident?" Vivian said, her voice cutting through the ballroom like a sword. "I want to understand what kind of family treats their son-in-law like an unwelcome guest at their own celebration. Edward, did you see what I saw?" Connor's father, Edward Wellington, looked like he'd been carved from granite. He was standing now, too, his face carrying enough ice to cool the entire ballroom. "I saw a man walk away from his wife's family after being treated like a servant," Edward said, his voice measured but cold. "I saw empty place settings and whispered conversations, and what appeared to be a very deliberate campaign of humiliation. The word humiliation hung in the air like a curse. Around the ballroom, conversations were stopping as people realized something major was happening. Sophia, who had been silent, suddenly burst into ugly, snotty sobs. "This is my engagement party," she wailed. "This is supposed to be the most important night of my life." "Maybe it still can be," Connor said, and there was something in his voice that made everyone freeze. Maybe this is the night you all learn something important about how to treat people with basic human decency. Connor Remington, prep school prince and heir to a real estate fortune, was defending me. If I hadn't been so furious, I might have been touched. "Connor, please," Sophia sobbed, reaching for his hand. "Don't let him ruin everything." But Connor pulled his hand away, sharp and deliberate. "Him?" His voice rising above his usual carefully modulated tone. "He's not the one who ruined anything, Sophia. He's the one who finally had enough dignity to walk away from people who clearly don't deserve him." Vivian looked around the table with disgust, usually reserved for discovering a bug in your soup. "Edward," she said to her husband, "I believe we've seen enough." "Indeed," Edward replied, standing and straightening his jacket with precise movements. "Connor, gather your things. We're leaving." "But the party," Margaret started, her voice weak and desperate. "The party," Vivian interrupted, "is over, at least for anyone with standards." Connor stood up slowly, his face a mask of disappointment and something that looked like grief. He looked down at Sophia, who was still crying, and for a moment I thought he might change his mind. Instead, he reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small velvet box, the engagement ring. Sophia's eyes went wide as he placed it on the table, next to the ring I'd left behind. "I'm sorry, Sophia," he said quietly, "but I can't marry into a family that treats people this way. My parents didn't raise me to accept cruelty as normal." The sound Sophia made was inhuman, somewhere between a scream and a howl. But Connor was already walking away, following his parents toward the exit with dignity that money can't buy. As they passed where I was standing, Vivian paused and looked directly at me. "Mr. Miller," she said, her voice formal but not unkind, "you handled that with remarkable restraint. I hope you find the happiness you deserve." And then they were gone, leaving behind a VIP table that looked like the aftermath of a social apocalypse. 2 rings sitting abandoned on white linen, flowers wilting under hot lights, and a family that had just discovered their empire of pretension had been built on quicksand. I walked out into the cool Philadelphia air that hit me like freedom. For the first time in 5 years, I felt like I could finally breathe. I took a cab to Mulligan's Pub in South Philly, spent the night with my old college buddies who knew me when I was just Jake from Camden. We drank beer from bottles, told stories that didn't require cultural references, and nobody once mentioned my net worth or social advancement prospects. It was freaking glorious. 6 months later, Connor had officially called off the engagement, and his family made sure everyone in Philadelphia society knew exactly why. Sophia was a social pariah. Margaret was forced to sell the gallery to cover canceled wedding costs, and the Harrison name was now synonymous with those awful people who humiliated their son-in-law. Emma showed up at my apartment 3 weeks after that night, looking like she'd been through hell. Bags under her eyes, hair that looked self-cut, desperate energy of someone whose world had imploded. "Please," she said when I opened the door, "we need to talk. I know I messed up, but we can fix this. I'll make them apologize." "It's too late," I said, and I meant it. "I'm done being your project, Emma." Now I'm sitting in that same coffee shop where I first met Emma, and this kindergarten teacher named Sarah just started laughing at cat videos on her phone. She thinks pizza for breakfast is perfectly acceptable, and when our eyes met, she smiled, not the calculated smile of someone managing an image, but genuine joy. "Sorry," she said, "but this video of cats falling off things is ridiculously funny." "No judgment here," I replied. "I once spent an entire afternoon watching penguins slip on ice." We started talking, and for the first time in years, I didn't have to think about whether my conversation topics were sophisticated enough or whether my laugh was too loud. Her name was Sarah, and she thought it was perfectly normal to be a real person instead of a carefully constructed social accessory. The best revenge isn't elaborate schemes. It's building a better life without the people who never appreciated you in the first place. Sometimes the trash takes itself out, and sometimes it takes the recycling with it.